to the Weekly Bioanalysis, a KCAS podcast.
Hello and welcome to the 34th episode of the Weekly Bioanalysis, the official podcast of KCAS, Bioanalytical and Biomarker services. KCAS is a bioanalytical CRO serving the pharmaceutical and biopharmaceutical industries for over 40 years. My name is John Perkins and I've been in the bioanalytical LCMS space for over 26 years. I'm here with my co-host, Dominic Guarino.
Hello, my name is Dominic Guarino, and I'm the Senior Scientific Advisor here at KCAS. I've been in the immunology and gene therapy space for over 26 years.
Dominic and I are senior scientific advisors at KCS, and either or both of us are available to answer any questions you may have regarding this podcast or any of KCS's services. I'm located in upstate New York, Dom is in Kansas, and our producers are in Missouri and Kansas City, so we're all over the map. We're thrilled to have you listening to the 34th episode of this podcast in 2021. The podcast is now available virtually everywhere: Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon, and many others. Wherever you choose to find and play your podcasts, you can now likely find the Weekly Bioanalysis. And of course, you can also continue listening to the podcast episodes via YouTube as well. So we welcome all of you who are joining us for the first time using any of these new platforms. As many of you know, if you've listened to any of our previous episodes, we started the podcast when COVID restrictions prevented us from continuing business as usual. We were unable to meet face to face, but we wanted to continue communicating with all of you. The podcast was an idea we'd always had, but suddenly it became the perfect media for us to employ. Today's podcast will be a review of the latest news and resources, and then a focus on a topic of our choosing. As always, we're constantly looking for topics, and we'd be happy to discuss something that you want us to cover. Then we'll wrap up and give you a little teaser for next week, letting you know what is coming in the future. So again, we're fired up to have you here, and we're looking forward to a fun episode today. To kick us off for podcast number 34, Dom is going to go over today's podcast topic a bit before we jump into the news and resources section. Dominic.
Yeah, thanks, John. As always, we'll go over some news and resources, and we'll have a focus on COVID, and then we'll do some latest non-COVID news. Of course, the JP Morgan is going to dominate our news section this week. And then our main portion is something that we've been hoping to discuss. It's a top 10 manufacturers in the fight against COVID-19. It's a fierce article that came out a couple weeks ago, and it's something that we hope you enjoy us discussing, because it really has an impact not only in the US but globally, and something that is for us a passion, as we are very much in the drug development space. And of course, manufacturing is a key role for not just COVID but all drug development and the evolution of it, and it'll be a real exciting topic as far as we're concerned. So John, let's jump in with the first news item.
Sure.
So our first articles about the JP Morgan conference. Tell us, I don't know, those of in our audience that don't know about the JP Morgan conference. It's one of the largest, I believe it is the largest conference for financial, let's say, mingling, right, John? That might be the word that comes to mind. But Don, tell us a little bit about this first article.
Yeah, so basically, like you mentioned, JP Morgan is a chance for investors to get together with industry leaders and talk about, possible trends in the industry, what's going on, where the industry's going, and it's hugely interesting for us because obviously we feed in the scraps, so we can figure out where things are going and watch for trends that will impact us in the longer term, as you know, with drug development. But the first couple of it, we've got a couple of news items where it's really two different people talking about the same topics. The first one is really talking about vaccines and it's talking about the straggler vaccines. So we have Pfizer and Moderna are authorized for use. AstraZeneca is in the same status in a number of countries around the world, but it's now looking at what's the need for some of these other other new entrants, and really the consensus across multiple people, and the first one is a guy called Sati Gupta of IAVA, saying that really we need as many vaccine candidates as possible. I mean, you've got 8 billion people in the world, which could be anywhere up to 16 billion doses needed of approved vaccines to administer vaccines to everyone. So although we have some that are already being applied. We need more just to ensure that all the globe can be covered.
Yeah, I think, John, the 8 billion people on the planet and 16 billion doses, that's one thing that supply is always going to be there for, we'll call them maybe follow on vaccines or future vaccines. And then I think we all could agree that, um, this even the supply chain issue itself, John, and some of those later vaccines that don't need temperature that should or won't
Sure.
need cold storage. I don't know. Even in general, it sounds capitalistic to me to have more. So big fan of more.
Yeah, so but I mean, it's also the case of there's the concern that this goes from a pandemic to being an endemic, so it's there all the time. So we need vaccines there. And the second article, as part of this first topic, was really representatives of Bayer talking. They're actually now collaborating with CureVac, sorry,
Yeah,
on
yeah,
on their mRNA vaccine, and basically Bayer are there to give the manufacturing muscle and to really help drive recruitment for big studies to help this smaller company. And like you say, CureVac is the mRNA vaccine that doesn't have the cold storage issues that Pfizer and Moderna have. So it's really, if it goes through and is authorized, it's in phase 3 right now. It's there and can be applied to a completely different population from where we would target the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. So yeah, ultimately consensus is we need more of these. So we'll hear, but these, the CureVac is likely to come through once it completes phase 3. I know the J&J is in phase 3, but even after that, we're still going to be looking at, well, what's the next vaccine? What's the next vaccine? And because there is the need for it, it's just that's we need doses to administer to get this completely under control.
yeah. No, and we've mentioned CureVac in the past and some of the advantages it has. It's good to see them partnering with Bayer. I think that's great news there. And John, as we kind of touched on, just the general need for 14 billion doses in general. And then I think you said something real interesting about it going from a pandemic to an epidemic. And so it's not just, maybe could be like it is for the flu vaccine, right? A seasonal thing, or maybe something you need every couple of years. So I don't think it's. I think we would all agree if we made 14 billion doses or actually 16 billion, right, and gave everybody on the planet 2 doses, we'd still need future doses. So, and then the good news on the CureVac is it's 95% effective at this stage. And one other kind of controversial point, maybe we can move on to another topic. And I don't know if controversial is the right word, John, but a lot of these trials you need like double armed, blinded. And what that means is someone gets a placebo, right? And somebody gets the actual vaccine. I think that's going to be harder and harder. And there's something to watch in terms of, um, how people who are bringing on the next vaccines have to navigate those waters because of the
Yeah,
ethical debate around, dosing someone with a placebo when there's, to something that's potentially certainly something that makes you sick or even life-threatening virus. Why would you give them a placebo if there's a vaccine? So
yeah.
that becomes a little bit harder too.
Yeah, so yeah. Also, I've seen articles where it's talked about volunteers over 65 asking, can they maybe move off the trial to actually be administered, an approved, an authorized vaccine because they're all they're of that age group where they could get the vaccine. But you're right, it might move from placebo-controlled trials to it's a comparative care. I think it's care of standard of care
Yeah.
so you show that your candidate is as good as what's out there, and that's going to be how you're showing effectiveness. The placebo arm will at some point probably fade away. We're not there yet, but at some point we'll see that go.
Yeah, and that's a great solution, John. I had totally forgot about that. Comparing it to the standard of care, and then I think there's still work to be done in the adolescents and children and
Sure.
pregnant mothers and things of that nature. But John, really, I hope our audience feels this. Those are two very good stories. Excellent advances in medicine, and stay tuned as we continue to. I'm sure we'll hear more about vaccines in the future, John. So maybe we'll move on to another topic, right? This one's again coming from JP Morgan. This is some news out of Novartis, John. Tell us a little bit about that.
So this is another two-parter, and it's really more relevant to the people in pharmaceutical research, and it's saying that the pandemic has really made pharmaceutical companies look at well, they've had to adapt how they run trials, and then it's now looking at, well, what was a success and how will we run trials in the future. So they've it's introduced, in many cases it's made speed things much quicker. The point's been made, and we've talked about this several times, that the collaborations seem to be easier right now, where not just are people seem to be more accessible between countries, between companies for collaborating. So they're not relying on face-to-face meetings. They're doing things via Zoom and phone calls, and they're moving things much quicker, and people are more open to collaborating. This has been one of the pleasant side effects for us as observers, that we're seeing much more collaborative approaches between companies to address COVID, but it's also rolling into other research areas, and it's a story that we'll touch on a bit later. It's also, in terms of it's changing recruitment. So looking at digital methodologies for recruitment purposes, doing remote monitoring visits. So again, not relying on people coming into clinics. So it's helping pharma evolve to become much more efficient in terms of how trials are done, to obviously helping get drugs to market.
Yeah, they're adapting, right? So it's wonderful news. So, what John, what you just said there, and I'll kind of put in my own words a little bit, because I want to make sure I'm getting and understanding some of this. The industry not only is starting to see an uptick in recruitment of patients, and the reason for that is they don't have to stay at the clinic, and they can do a lot of that from home monitoring. So that's good news, right, John?
Yep.
We've talked about how clinical trials slowed down. That affected a number of industries. Well, it's great news. So maybe they have to go in and get that one dose at the whatever facility or site it might be, and then the rest of it can be done remotely. They don't have to go back and forth. Although, in our world, we still need samples, so maybe they can go to some local clinic rather than, say, a phase one unit or something of that nature. But a nice workaround, and really a cool. It's encouraging, and it makes sense. I think we're seeing it makes a lot of sense. We're seeing spikes in um, increases in not just COVID trials, but trials across the board. John, if you know what I mean, we're quite busy. It's why we're here on a Saturday doing this instead of our normal Thursday or Friday, because it's just there's a surge early on in the year. And I think in part it's because so many more clinical trials are opening up.
Absolutely, and actually, when we talk about this being a two-parter, similar things were said by Lilly's CEO David Ricks. Moderna Stefan Bancel was saying, had a similar message. But one of Lilly's comments was, unexpected benefit of these remote trials is the enrollment with digital support was faster, but they're also seeing less dropout. So again, it's helping trials complete. So it all lends to the efficiency of getting trials wrapped up and
Yeah.
helping drugs move forward. So it's all great. I thought the Moderna was interesting, because he was actually talking. It's changing their hiring strategy. So where before they were always looking to relocate people to site, they're now much more open to people working remotely, because they've seen that they can function with people working remotely, and it's actually changed their mindset in terms of hiring people, so that if someone's at a distance, then being at a distance is no longer a barrier to them joining the company.
Yeah, John, and I agree. We'll talk. Maybe I'll go back to what you just said around remote and hiring and everything, but a couple things around also the clinical trials. You mentioned that there's a lower dropout rate. That's a cost savings, and that's really
Sure.
something that is, I think, good for not just the companies, but that we hope that would trickle down to all of us, right? And then the reliability of the data is what comes to mind. Now that you can do it digital, one might think that not only will you get a more robust set because everybody's going in, or excuse me, rather, you don't have to rely on people making visits at specific times and all that. It should be a more reliable as well as a more fuller set of data, is what I'm trying to say in this virtual necessity to do everything virtually, which, John, I hadn't thought about it. And I hope our audience understands and appreciates how great it is that they've adapted like this. And stay tuned. We'll continue to monitor that.
One last comment. One last comment is Genentech also talking on this theme. Basically said it's helped the remote the remote or the digital approach to recruiting patients, etc., has helped them because it's actually helped them tap into underserved communities. So it's not just it's not just the white population. They're actually using this as a mechanism to get into communities they wouldn't necessarily
Oh,
access. So again, it's a huge benefit because as we talked about in multiple podcasts, we're seeing that the COVID affects different communities to a different extent, so disproportionately, in minority communities. So this is a big deal.
yeah, I agree. I again, that's as that is an amazing outcome of the pandemic here, because you're right. There's not a lot of like clinical trial units in you know, I'll say resource poor nations or third world countries. And so now they can simplify that, John, right? They don't
Mhm.
necessarily have to have these big units and all that. They can find it and do it digitally. So it'll translate even more. What's being done in say the more advanced nations will they should be able to find out ways to make it a lot more reaching, and Genentech seems to be spearheading that, so good for them.
So moving on, still on COVID. This is an interesting story, and it talks more about we keep touching on the logistical challenges of actually distributing the vaccine. But this is Pfizer and BioNTech, obviously the first vaccine out there, are looking to scale up their manufacturing capabilities. However, to do that, it's actually meant that they've got a temporary they're temporarily cutting deliveries to EU and Canada. So because it's what they're actually working on scaling up a factory in Belgium to help them meet their supply goal. But they've made commitments to countries in Europe and Canada in terms of supply, and now they're not able to meet that commitment. So, not surprisingly, you've got a number of countries aren't very happy about this. Um, I don't know. I don't really know what this means in the long term. I just thought it was interesting. There's obviously this scramble to try and increase production, but then they're balancing it against their deliveries, and yeah, it's once just getting to approval doesn't make things all
No,
rosy and
yeah,
rosy and great for you. There's still a lot of work to be done.
yeah, they're rationing it, huh? That's the word that comes to mind. And
Pretty much, yeah,
there's a
yeah.
lot of upset. There's a few upset countries in the EU, and there we're reading words like "this is unacceptable," and
Yes, and Germany said I think Italy were really up in arms, and then in Canada, I think particularly in Ontario, talking should they be administering the drug a different way or the vaccine a different way to help keep supply going. It's just a challenge.
yeah.
On
Well, I
sorry,
wouldn't
go
say
on.
we've. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. That's fine.
I wouldn't say it's been seamless here in the U.S. either, John.
No,
It's
I
been
mean,
very
I
some states are much more, and even I'll do a little side story here. One of our employees was able to get the vaccine in Missouri because she's eligible due to our status as a company, and they're just doing a much better job. And Missouri is, 6 miles away from me, from distributing the vaccine. And here in Kansas, where not only do I not know, even my friend who's in the police force, he has no idea when he might be receiving the vaccine. So just even within my small little world, it's like two different worlds. I think Kansas is starting to catch up a little bit, but it's just been messy is the word that comes to mind. And really, it could have been rolled out a lot better, but it is what it is.
It's the same here. I mean, my daughter's a counsellor, and because she's talking to patients face to face, she was eligible for the vaccine, so she wasn't quite sure to begin with, and I think she took some persuading to be signed up. She's now signed up for the vaccine, but they don't know when they're going to get supply now. So
Yeah.
it's going to be following up and following up to find out when it can happen. She will get it, but we just don't know any sense of timing. So go
Yeah.
back. Sorry, go
Sorry,
on.
I'll say Massachusetts. My sister got it early on as a nurse, but the rest of they have no. My family has no idea if they're going to get it, including my mother, who's like, it's very hard to sign up, and
Sure.
websites are crashing. It's been a little bit challenging.
So to get back to the Pfizer vaccine, just one other thing that has been mentioned about this, the vaccine, that it looks like it's protective against the B117 variant that was first identified in southeast England. Because BioNTech actually did a study where let's see, they found that the ratio, so they took sera from 16 participants in a short trial and test them against the B117 variant, compared to the strain that came from Wuhan, and they showed the 50% neutralization geometric mean titer of the sera against the SARS variants was pretty much the same. So they're convinced that the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine will be effective for that variant.
No, great news. Yeah, John, I think not. I don't think it's too surprising. Thankfully, it's not going to. I think of it as mutating as quickly as I don't know, not as in I don't know if anticipate is the right word, but it's not. This variant seems to be neutralized, and let's take that win as a society and hope that not hope. Well, certainly there's great technologies out there to predict it, John, and I won't go too
Mhm.
much into that. But let's just say I'm sure on the heels of this round of vaccine, they're already working on the second generation of them, which is I'm great news for all of us.
Absolutely. Like as we said, we need as many out there as possible.
Yeah, yeah. So, John, are we rounding out our COVID? Are we done with COVID, and maybe
Yep.
we'll move off of COVID?
Yep. Yep.
Um,
Let's move. Do you want to take this next one into non-COVID because it's much more your environment?
yeah, sure. This is from GSK. They talk about a preclinical acne treatment from I guess it's GSK is backing a preclinical acne treatment with a company called Allego Biosciences that uses our friend CRISPR technology to kill bacteria. So when I first looked at this, something popped into my mind. But back to the therapy, essentially, it's gene editing to allow for the prevention of acne, which is great stuff. It uses, I believe, some virus-like particles and bacterial phages to get into the veins to allow for the gene therapy to be administered. So, but John, as I said, I think we talked about this a little bit offline, and maybe before I dive in there, you want to add anything to that
Yep.
story there because it's a wonderful story. I grew up taking all sorts of antibiotics. I absolutely hated it. I had one of the few things, John, I know you've had a few in your time. As a kid, I had some bad acne and I couldn't stand it. And I was, antibiotic treatments for quite a while and had to avoid the sun for a summer or two. But yeah, no, this is a great advancement.
Yes, this is really interesting. I use the word, overuse the word interesting again. What's going on? Where we think of CRISPR, it's gene editing within the body to try and fix a defection, a defect. Defection, where did that come from? Defect within the gene. But here, what they're doing is they're actually using CRISPR to basically to really break the gene
Yeah.
sequence to cut the bacterial DNA within the body, within the body's microbiomes. And the challenge they've had with this is delivery of the technology. So because they're using viral particles from bacteriophages in the same vein that gene therapies are administered for humans. This is with them going for acne, it's a bacterial cream, so it's basically applied topically, and gets directly to the affected area in the skin.
Yeah.
But if you want, let's.
Well, hang on before you say like if you don't know, most of your antibiotics they're taken systemically, and you hope the bug can take it up, and then it blocks it. This is done more at the site, on topically, which is fantastic, John. So it's a much less should be a much more directed therapy, and that's what we're talking about. But John, you're right. The thing that you and I discussed a little bit offline is all those bacterial antibiotic resistant bacteria. That's where we see the future, and that's why we're talking about it on our podcast, right, John? Because that kind of fell by the wayside. Suddenly, no one's talking about all these antibiotic resistant bacteria that are out there because we've had COVID and all these things going on. But this is really promising technology. That's why we hope you're tuning into our podcast so you can learn about maybe the next greatest out there outside of just COVID. So really exciting, John. I see immediately when I read this, I'm like, wow, this could really move into that space, which would be fantastic.
Sure. Yeah, it could be transformative. So yeah, I will definitely watch this one with interest. So this could be great. But moving on to a next topic, this is back to the collaboration between companies and Vir and Gilead, who are two of the biggest names in the hunt for an hepatitis B cure, actually teaming up for a combination trial. So again, it's a collaborative approach. Where we've talked a lot about Gilead because of remdesivir, and Gilead are known for the retroviral cocktails. So this time, what they're doing is looking at combining the Gilead technology with that of Vir. Vir are much more of a large molecule company. Gilead more of a small molecule, and it's seen with having antivirals that have different mechanisms. If they administer them as a cocktail, can they address, an unmet need? When we have hepatitis B medicines out there, but they're all really managing it such that if you stop taking it, then it will flare back up. Gilead and Vir's a goal for this collaboration is to actually come up with a cure such that when you take it, you're done, and if you stop taking it, it's not going to come back to you. So I mean, it's obviously very ambitious, but it really it feeds into what we're saying from the JP Morgan, how much we're reading more and more stories of companies coming together to collaborate and say, how can we work together to meet this problem rather than working on their own two distinct
Yeah.
paths.
Yeah, John, I think it's everybody has evolved, and there's a much greater collaborative environment out there. These two companies, and I mean, this is something I'm just guessing, but you wouldn't have expected a company like Ver Therapeutics to partner with Gilead a year ago. It just they would have touted the line independently. They would have looked at it differently. But now that they're, like you said, they're coming together and treating, hepatitis B is what they're targeting. Now there's ways of halting it, but never really curing you of it, or no long lasting cure. So this has the potential, and they're still a little ways away. But it's great to see two very opposite organizations collaborating together to meet something. Because John, I don't know about you, but hepatitis B has been something that's been studied for, I don't know, certainly since I've been in medicine for 30 years. Even treated some with some autologous T cell therapies back in the day when we were treating metastatic renal cell carcinoma patients. We were given the similar treatments to hepatitis B patients to try and have some long lasting effects. So great stuff, John. And thrilled to see it. And we love the collaborative approach. And not only that, a lot of, I don't know if unmet needs, but maybe like things that kind of have fallen by the wayside, John. It's good to be reading about so many things that are coming back online for therapies. And,
Uh,
just generally, it makes me warm and fuzzy.
I mean, yeah, I mean, really, they talk of the in terms of the need for this. I mean, there's 300 million cases worldwide
Oh, yeah.
in
Yeah.
terms of hepatitis B, so there's a big need out there.
So, John, the next story is one that, we go from all these feel good, great things, and now we'll jump right back into other things that are not so great. So, there's an ex Merck scientist accused of stealing trade secrets on Keytruda, and we can talk more about what Keytruda is, raising the threat of a 10-year prison term. John, maybe you want to field this one because you unearthed it. These are the things that I'll say it. A locked door keeps a locked person on. A lock keeps an honest person honest, and this is just a bad person doing bad things, John. It's unfortunate.
Yeah, we talk about all the positives in this podcast week to week, but we do love a bit of scandal too, and this is scandalous. It,
Absolutely.
it,
We love sensationalism, John. No.
it's the basic story is a former Merck immuno-oncology director faces up to 10 years in prison for allegedly stealing trade secrets about Keytruda and other drugs. The researcher is charged with stealing and transmitting trade secrets around the time he left Merck to take up a position at AstraZeneca in 2019. The actual lawsuit doesn't mention the companies by name, but once you sort of parse what's being said, it was fairly obvious what was being talked about according to
Yeah.
the article I read. This is being brought by DOJ and FBI against Shafak Quadri, PhD, and I love. I mean, it. So in terms of the details, obviously got the files, but it's emailing them to his own Gmail and is it Gmail and Gmail and Yahoo accounts, as well as his future work account at AstraZeneca. And then when they actually searched his house, they found, various files, etc., there as well. So yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
this is absolutely wrong. These are exactly the sort of people we don't want in our industry, but they're always going to crop up every now and then,
Yeah.
and they do provide an interesting counterbalance to everything else we talk about.
And then Keytruda, for those that know, it's a monoclonal antibody. Hopefully, that makes sense what I just said there. It's a therapeutic monoclonal antibody that is against PD-1. That's the programmed cell death protein 1. That's found on a lot of your lymphocytes. It treats a wide range of different cancer types, from melanoma to lung to head and neck to lymphomas to stomach cancers to just about everything. So Keytruda, I think it's still, what was it, fifth on our list, or John, maybe ninth? I feel like it was, but that one's going to skyrocket up, and I would predict that Keytruda could be the number one drug in a year or two. It's one that is a co-medication on so many clinical trials, John, and so
Mhm.
this individual was, I don't know what he was thinking, but hey, let's be thankful that the long arm of the law was able to reach
Yeah,
him.
yeah, and actually relatively quickly, because this all centers around September, October 2019. So, in terms of moving from when it happened to having to, him being charged, it's relatively quick in terms of a case like this. Yeah, I mean, I think you're right about Keytruda. I mean, we don't touch on it much week to week when we're talking, but it regularly crops up in terms of additional trials for additional applications, and like you say, co-administration with other oncology drugs. So it's a key weapon in the battle
Yeah,
against
and
cancer.
its counterpart is Optivo, which is
Yeah.
another anti PD-1 antibody. There's John. Those are two biggies there, and I don't know about you. I see commercials for them all the time.
Yep.
Only when I'm watching Real Housewives of whatever with my wife, which I enjoy a lot these days, John, because,
It's
well,
it's
I
it's
like spending time with my wife. No.
it's been four weddings in this house this week for whatever reason. It was like there was some stuff went on this week that all
Wow.
you needed was trash TV, and that's what ended up on
For
the.
well, we'll have to touch on that. But John, I think it's a good segue into our main topic. This is one that I think we've talked a little bit about today in terms of top 10 manufacturing fights. That's our topic. The topic is the top 10 manufacturers in the fight against COVID-19. John, this is I don't know if to me, it's a big topic because it's so relevant to everyone. Without further ado, maybe you want to run down the list of them,
Sure.
and then we can dive in.
Yeah, sure. I'll start off with just an introduction. I mean, in terms of addressing the pandemic, it's a huge undertaking. Not only do you have to find the vaccines, drugs, etc., to address the virus, but as we've talked about earlier, you need a system in place or logistics in place to manufacture those drugs and vaccines and then distribute them. So although the drug companies are like the public face of the war against COVID, they really wouldn't be successful without not just these manufacturers but contract research organizations in general. And I'd hope to touch more on it. Maybe we will touch on it as we talk. But we're KCS is a part of this, but we're a small part of it. But all the clinical trial CROs are a big deal in terms of helping recruit patients to get these drugs moving through. It really is a collaborative process between the drug companies and the contract research organizations, and then as we're getting to distribution, these manufacturers. And this again is a Fierce Farmer article. And we'll go through the 10 and talk about some of the highlights of these. But basically,
Yeah.
contract manufacturing was already doing well, because pharma companies recognize how much they can benefit from working with external partners. But COVID has basically stepped that up
Jo-
a gear. And one last thing I'm going to say, these top 10, they're not just in the US, they're worldwide, because there's that worldwide recognition that to address the pandemic we need big players all over the globe really being an integral part of this, and that's a lot of the interest was who's working with who and what the different focuses are in different countries. And I'll pass it back to you, Dom.
Yeah, no, I think thanks. That's a great kind of overview, and I hope it sets the tone for the rest of the main portion here. I'll just add that, John, I don't know about you, but when I started in the CRO space about 15 years ago, I had friends of mine that were in pharma and big pharma, and they were like, "Why are you doing that? That's like bottom feeder stuff." So to set the tone on things and how much it's changed, even in our lifetime or recently, CROs were considered like not a necessary evil. They were even considered like, "Oh man, well, just if we have to, we'll use it." Well, full circle now, John. What you just said was in fact, at the JP Morgan, it became the preferred way for drug makers to develop drugs is to outsource it. And so that's a segue into these top 10, the Fierce Farmers top 10 manufacturing CROs, or some of them are CROs, most of them are CROs. And then I really like what you said around global. That is an important piece too, because that becomes a major impact on not just cost savings and things like that, but actually distribution of some of these things, as well as it's just a general. In general, the need and the demand is there that this is a global effort for manufacturing of not just COVID, but we'll focus on that now. But in general, we can see how when the COVID pandemic is over, John, let's hope that more drug distribution, more drug manufacturing sites can distribute drugs for other therapies, right? And that's another unmet
Sure.
need we sort of talked about. So that's even like maybe more further reaching, but I'm getting off topic. So John, let's just jump right in, and maybe I'll just go over the companies.
Sure. We can
Let's
alternate.
start with the
We can
first one.
alternate through them. So
Yeah,
if you start, and then we'll go
I'll
from
go.
there.
Why don't you start with the first one, because the second
Okay.
one's near and dear to me.
Hey, let's do that. Absolutely. So, first one, they listed Emergent Biosolutions. They actually have they're based in Maryland. History with the U.S. government. So they were a big part of the Operation Warp Speed in terms of bringing up manufacturing, and they're very involved with a number of vaccine developers, including J&J, AstraZeneca, Novavax, and Vaxart. So they've basically got multiple multi-million-dollar deals across multiple sites, but this is they're much more of a US focus. So next in line.
Yeah, is Catalent. That's a contract developer and manufacturing organization. And the reason why I say it's near and dear to me is my wife works at Catalent as a program manager there. And so there is a big manufacturing facility here in Kansas City. But prior to the pandemic, they worked to rapidly boost its cell and gene therapy offerings. Some of those which included viral vector systems, as well as mRNA coronavirus shot candidates. So that naturally led into them being the leader for three of our major players in the vaccine space: Moderna, AstraZeneca, and J&J. So, and Catalent's massive, John, but let's move on to the next one.
Next one, we talked about this because this was a new one to us several months ago. Serum Institute of India, and here's where the international focus comes in. They've got a massive campus for producing vaccines. But their driving concern was, well, yeah, it's all very well, if the drugs are mainly being developed in the developed world, what happens in terms of rollout to vaccines to the developing world? So their focus really is India and other developing nations. So they are a huge part of addressing that. They're mainly working with us, AstraZeneca. And so developing producing the vaccine for AstraZeneca. But there's actually an article this week that said there was a fire on the Serum Institute site, except the production of the AstraZeneca vaccine wasn't affected by that. They've also got an agreement going with Novavax, and their aim is to produce 1 billion vaccine doses per year. I mean, which is huge. But you
Yeah,
think about that, it's still that's a 16th, so that's still only what 6% of our need.
yeah,
So it's massive, but it just shows how much of a challenge it is to
yeah.
produce all the necessary doses
Well,
to administer what's needed.
I got to say, the Serum Institute of India is fascinating, John. I think I might put it on my bucket list. I think I've never been to India, but if I do go, I want to go visit this massive campus they got. It's sad
I,
to hear that they had a fire.
I don't know any more fallout from that. And actually, on that topic, I mean, like we're saying, the manufacturing for much of this is global. The same news article saying that uh, this was Serum Institute of India. It didn't impact the AstraZeneca vaccine, so it really the effect on that production isn't harmful. I don't know what it did affect, but in the same article, the UK has been suffering from massive flooding as a fallout. I think it's from Tropical Storm Christoph, and there's actually a manufacturing facility in Wrexham in Wales has been impacted by flooding. So
Wow.
it's like, so not only are we've got all this challenge getting all this manufacturing set up all over the place, but now you got to be watching it. Well, what's the effect of the weather on our manufacturing?
Well, I
And
hope
there's a great story about Wrexham, which we'll hopefully touch on another time. But do you know about Ryan Reynolds buying up Wrexham Football Club?
I did not. I
Then
do like
and
Ryan Reynolds, though.
we'll save that for another week because
Yeah.
I'll give more background.
Yeah,
Anyway, let's move on
and
to
even you touched on manufacturing in the Ireland has a massive amount of it due to some pushing of it 5 to 10 years ago. So
sure.
they weren't affected as well. But we could probably talk a whole article about or at least a whole podcast on the Irish manufacturing and what that all meant. So, without further ado, we'll move on to the next one. It's Fujifilm Biotechnologies. They're a contract developer and manufacturing organization. They're looking to make more vaccines. I think we've touched on them. They've really jumped into that space. They're partnering with Lilly on not necessarily COVID, but with antibodies. They're also working with Novavax in their North Carolina facility, and then they've got big facilities in Denmark and elsewhere. And it's most notable here is also they partner with Samsung. So they really got, to me, that's a big, I think they're one of the top five um, um, revenue generating, I guess, companies in the world. Samsung, I know them well because I believe they sponsor Chelsea, so that makes it fun. They're also working to increase their production of other drugs, and overall, Fujifilm really a big player in the space. I'm guessing they've adopted. It's a weird name. I wonder if they'll ever think about changing that because, does anybody still use film, John? Excuse me. Does anybody use film, John? I guess I'm off topic with that, but anyhow,
I don't know.
Fujifilm doing their part, partnering with a number of big players.
Yeah,
Excellent, excellent.
Fujifilm are interesting because like they're the only one on the list who are actually developing their own drugs as well as contract manufacturing for others. So Avigan was for them was developed as an anti-flu drug that they've put. It's been in clinical trials. They've submitted or they're looking to submit it for approval in Japan, but so far it's the results from the trials have been relatively mixed in terms of success. So it's although it sort of looked like something that could be repurposed and might be hopeful, it hasn't really shown that yet. And I think you're right in terms of obviously Fujifilm are Japanese and Japanese companies are fascinating because we work with the drug arm, but if once you actually start for many of them, once you get close to them, you realize the drug piece is just a small part of a much bigger organization. They're doing all sorts of things around
Mm.
the pharmaceutical piece, and so Samsung, I assume that gives them a base in South Korea, so that again it's the spreading the geography to make sure that the doses are being distributed around the globe. So I'll move on
Yeah,
to
yeah.
next on the list is Lonza, and they're a Swiss-based company, with one of the largest contract manufacturing organizations in the world, and they have a 10-year agreement with Moderna, looking to produce a billion doses per year of that authorized mRNA vaccine, and are also working with AstraZeneca in production of their investigative dual antibody therapeutics. So what we're seeing is these companies are large and they're obviously looking where they can help. It's not just the vaccines; it's the antibodies that are complex to produce. Because also then you're looking at therapies to address the virus as well.
Yeah, no, and Lonza's massive. They've got many divisions, and nope, it's good. And it should be emphasized: manufacturing a dual antibody or something that's a bispecific, nothing easy about that. Really, again, John, good story there, and we're touching a lot of the world, seeing how they're Swiss based. I must admit, we're going to move on to the next one. This is probably the only one I had not heard of on our list, John. It's Flow Corporation. They're a Virginia-based contracted with BARDA, and maybe that's why. I'm a lot more familiar with BARDA, and they're working on generics and active ingredients for manufacturing. It's part of onshoring efforts to drive U.S. production. Oh, maybe it's coming back to me now, John. I feel like we touched on this
The-
when we back in the several months ago, but
yeah,
this is I'm guessing, without reading too much more into it, this is a probably more of a government-based thing, seeing how it's BARDA. And again, it's that initiative to bring some of it back to the U.S., which, I'm not, I think that's a good thing, but I still also really want to emphasize that we should be working globally, not just, oh, hey, that we exposed some issues with supply chain in the U.S. for our generics. Let's take it all to the U.S. But
sure.
anyhow, John, I digress.
Yeah.
And so, Flow Corporation, you make the top 10. Good for you.
Next one up is CSL, and this is we're getting to Australia. So their primary focus is actually ensuring supply for Australia. They've signed agreements with AstraZeneca as well as AstraZeneca and University of Oxford, as well as University of Queensland, who are developing their own investigative vaccine, which is one I don't know very much about at all. But they're also partnering an international consortium alongside drug makers such as Takeda, looking to speed development of a hyperimmune intravenous immunoglobulin HIG derived from convalescent plasma to treat COVID-19, and that's NIAID is running that trial. So that will be something. We'll see if when we get the readout of that trial, obviously, will be something we'll discuss.
Yeah. So, John, the Queensland, I don't know the specific vaccine they're working on, but I did collaborate with them in graduate school on the virus-like particles, which went on to be Gardasil. So they're a big player in the vaccine space down under. It was a nice collaboration, and we did some fun stuff. And I'll also share that an individual who worked for me for, or at least reported to me for 4 or 5 years, her husband took a position down in Australia, and she went to work for, wait for it, CSL. She actually worked there for about 5 years. She's back in the US now. So
It's a
a
small
little
world.
bit, yeah, it is. And then in terms of the convalescent plasma treatments, without saying too much, we are in that space as an organization. There are many people. In this case, they got a hyperimmune intravenous immunoglobulin, which is they call it an HIG, which is neat. But there are a lot of people that are just looking for people that were positive for COVID and taking those antibodies out. And without too much, there's a couple different ways you can do that. And really, we've talked about it before, maybe a mixed bag therapeutically, but it obviously, I think it has a very positive effect on a certain subset of patients at a certain stage. And without further, let's maybe move on.
Yep.
Up, John, it's Oxford Biomedica. Well, I think we know who they are, right? And they're a contract development and manufacturing organization. They're in a consortium with the University of Oxford. That's where I was going. So they're heavily involved in the AstraZeneca vaccine, which I'm still pulling for you all. I think that's the vaccine I'd like. But anyhow, as manufacturer, they specialize in viral vectors. They work in the UK Vaccines Manufacturing and Innovation Center. Really neat stuff there. And they've increased their capacity for the AstraZeneca vaccine, as well as other viral vector vaccines. So, John, great stuff here, right? Not only at the forefront of COVID, but it's helping with all the other vaccines. I'm sure they're growing like wildfire over there in Oxford.
Exactly. So number 9 in our list, so we're almost wrapped up, is ROVI or Rovi, and basically they're working with Moderna. The full name is, they're Spanish, and their full name is Laboratorios Pharmaceuticos Rovi. So obviously they're looking to manufacture the Moderna vaccine with a name for distribution in Europe, and they're looking to start work for that in early 2021.
Yeah, that one I had heard of, but no, probably the least amount of outside of that Flow Corporation. John, I don't have much to add other than I'm happy to learn they're working with Moderna, and of course, I lived in España for a summer, and always a special place in my heart. So, last and not least is Thermo Fisher Scientific, a giant here in the U.S. and globally. They have multiple contacts throughout the world, and they're just, due to their sheer breadth of company business lines, they are a major player in the COVID fight against COVID and just about everything in terms of just their general breadth. I mean, I think we buy more supplies from Thermo than any other company, but they've really expanded in the production of viral vector media tubes to carry COVID-19 test samples to laboratories. To laboratories. John, I'm trying to steal from you early on a Saturday, but the aim is to ramp up testing, and they recently finished a very interesting here, a $40 million expansion in Lenexa, Kansas. So I do know where this is located. I can see it sometimes from the highway, and the facility is ramped up to make about 8 million doses a week of that viral transport media. John, wonderful. Very happy to be living in an area that's helping out on the fight against COVID, even if it's in the form of viral transport media, which is a critical component for testing of COVID-19. So great story there.
So yeah, so we talked about the top 10 manufacturers. A couple of other things I think we want to add on to this. There was, again, going back to JP Morgan, PPD said that CROs are better prepared as COVID-19 surges. This is effectively a news item, but within this main discussion, and sees pandemic trials as a long-term opportunity. And so again, it's reflecting what we said about the pharmaceutical companies. CROs and PPDs are another of the big ones, big clinical CRO, that they've learned lessons since March. Yes, they saw a slowdown, then they had to gear up. They've really looked at how does that change? How can they improve how they do trials? And that will then drive the business going forward. So the pandemic has been obviously tough, but it's also been a real opportunity in terms of really figuring out how better to do business in this industry.
Yeah, I think it's dispelled a lot of beliefs around, oh, remote working isn't effective, or even John. I hope the audience understands how powerful um, the future of clinical trials might be. That now that it can be done somewhat remotely and with a much, again, I can't emphasize enough how I think that would really, because there's so many people that drop off, maybe they don't take it at the right time. That all of that should go bye if we can allow people to do it remotely and at their convenience, right, John? So really fascinating stuff. I love to hear that PPD is evolving. I know we're certainly evolving, John. I think maybe we want to touch a little bit about what we're doing in terms of COVID, and I'll let you kind of run this because and then I'll jump in a little bit
Yeah,
around
I,
it. But I think you did a good job of writing this up, and I don't want to steal your thunder.
this I just thought, as we're talking about, like I say, the manufacturers are a big piece of it. The large clinical CROs are a big piece. And I thought, well, we're part of it, and equally vital. I mean, like we mentioned at the beginning, the CROs are an essential part of the speedy move to market for vaccines and other therapies. It just could not have been done without us. And it's some of it's come down to, we've been open when when the pharma companies shut down and their workforces went completely remotely. As CROs, as a service provider, we couldn't do that. We had to have people in working, and we obviously we really re-engineered the entire facility to accommodate that, and allow people to work safely. But we had to maintain business as usual, and this is not just us; it's across the entire contract research field. It's clinical facilities, preclinical facilities, CMC, discovery support. All that had to keep going, not just for COVID, but for other therapies too.
Yeah,
And so, Bioanalytical has been involved all the way through, and we're supporting COVID research, not just for innovative drugs, but we're also looking at biomarkers, so where the innovator drug is, we're not necessarily analyzing, but we are looking at the pharmacodynamic effect of those drugs and the effect on the body. And I'll let
yeah.
you go now.
No, John, I think you're really hammering home where we stand in the COVID world. Um, in terms of vaccines, I think we have one, maybe two biomarker trials that we're helping to look at, some safety biomarkers and things, but that's really a small piece of it. Where we are really helping out, and if you recall, when COVID first hit, there was a therapeutic company that we were working with who pivoted onto COVID for therapeutic purposes, and that's really think we're up to 8 or 9 different companies we're working with in this space. And the initial salvo caught us all by surprise was clinical kitting, right, John? They
Yeah,
could not get clinical kitting for their support of their COVID therapeutic. So that was like the first thing. And since then, our clinical supply kitting has just, I think it's increased 100%, John. It's really taken off. There's just been a dearth of clinical supplies. And for whatever reason, our team has been able to maintain our supply chain. And so we've seen a major uptick there. And not just in COVID, but in any clinical trial, which is, and again, I'm not worried about revenue. It's the idea of just helping and pitching in with helping to advance drugs. And that's what we're all about here. But then the second piece is those therapeutics. There's been a lot of small molecules that we had historically worked on where we're doing some PK analysis for the therapeutics, but really the biomarkers. And you mentioned it, the pharmacodynamic space. That's really growing more and more. In fact, even this week, I had a conversation with one of our clients, and we got a couple specific biomarkers that I can't mention, but they're really cool. They're biomarkers that have been around for quite a long time in like the cardiac space, and they're actually becoming very, very popular for COVID and the efficacy of it. Additionally, you mentioned biomarkers, but we're getting much more hits in flow cytometric analysis as well. We've got a nice program there. So, John, we all should be very proud as members of KCS working in this space. And in general, my parting thoughts are: what an amazing time, John.
sure.
We talked about this offline. It's an unbelievable time to be anybody that's new to science, to be able to study a pandemic at this level, and just the sheer exposure of things. I think, and I think of when I was younger, I was just surprised to learn there was immunology, John. Now just think about all that's out there in terms of um, just diversifying yourself and understanding what you can do in a science role.
Absolutely, yeah. There's tons of opportunity, and the need in this industry is huge.
Yeah, I even did I think I told you about this, a virtual career day for, it turns out, a high school not too far away from you. And it was fascinating, some of the questions I got from those students. And, I feel like I'm getting very old when I say, when I was their age, I would have never had these questions. Like I sound like the person I don't want to be. But anyhow, they were incredibly intuitive. They were asking some hard hitting questions around COVID and even just gene therapies. And it was a wonderful experience to give an hour of time to help people understand, or at least students that are interested in science, some of the career paths outside of just laboratory work is what I sort of talked to them about. But anyhow, John, I digress. I think we're wrapping up our agenda.
Yep.
John, it's a Saturday morning here. For those of you that don't know, we had to push our podcast off slightly. We don't mind making this small sacrifice. We were both quite busy this week with the turn of the calendar and marching into the first month of the year. January's kind of wrapping up. John, what do you got for plans, or tell us a little bit about what's going on in your world over the last couple of weeks?
There's some stuff I'll maybe hold to the next time because I actually need to get my doctor's clearance to talk about it. Yeah, I think today's mainly I
John, I got to
plan to.
stop you. Your daughter's clearance. That's awesome, John. I love the fact are you going to sign a waiver or something, John? Is that what
Uh,
you're going to do?
so this weekend, so plan today is we had a dose of snow last night, but actually the roads are clear, so that's fine. I'm hoping to go to the farmer's market to get a shoulder of lamb, to do like a slow cooked lamb that you do on a bed of onions, potatoes, and thyme. First time I did that, I ended up with the lamb on the floor because the oven fell out the wall, and there's a story about that. This time I've done it once more, and it's really good. So this is my next attempt. And then actually Monday, we were actually going to have haggis and what they call in Scotland neeps and tatties, which is turnips and potatoes because it's Burns night, and so I'll have some whiskey. And I'm not overly bought into the Burns night thing, but I do like haggis once in a while. So that's another thing we're doing
No,
this week.
no, John, what is Burns night? This is new to me. I guess I'm
So, so,
ignorant.
so Robert Burns was a Scottish poet,
Oh, I know who
and
you're talking. Okay, I got
yeah,
you. Go ahead, tell the story.
I,
Now it's
I,
making sense.
I honestly don't know much of the tradition of Burns Night at all. All I know is it's traditional to have haggis, neeps, and tatties with whiskey. I mean, we were an English family growing up in Glasgow. I don't really know all the Scottish traditions at all, but I like haggis as a taste, and to do it have it once in a while is great. So
I
we
think
have it.
we Sorry,
We
I
have it
think we just like hearing you say haggis, neats, and turnips. Is that what you're saying?
neeps and tatties. So tatties are potatoes,
Oh,
neeps are turnips.
John, I'm going to park the car and have a yacht on you because that's what I think it sounds like to me. That's
So,
wonderful.
so yes, what's your plans? Let's get off mine.
Yeah, no, yours. I love. And the lamb sounds fabulous. I got that pizza oven, my Uni
Sure.
pizza oven. It arrived, which is fantastic. It's well ahead of schedule. I'm about halfway putting it together. I'm hoping the weather gets a little bit warmer. Got to get some smoke pellets, but the Chiefs are playing in the AFC Championship game. If you didn't know, that's the third year in a row for them. I plan to maybe make some pizzas and go to a Super Bowl party. If it's warm enough, I might bring pizza. That's right. I'm an Italian guy bringing pizza to a Super Bowl party. Just want to set the tonality for everybody listening to our podcast. Outside of that, my son's now driving, so that's always fun. He's been taking himself to school for a couple weeks. We got him a nice Nissan Sentra. He loves it. It's got some fancy wheels. That was the selling feature for him.
Good.
And yeah, and then mom's worried. Even now, he might go drive to his outdoor lacrosse practice, which is interesting because it's only about 30 degrees out. But he can drive to that legally by himself. Otherwise, it's me in the shotgun seat, holding on to the white knuckling every because he's still, the depth, the perception. I think sometimes they get a little too close to the side is what he does, But he's
Sure.
a great driver. He's a really good
Yeah.
driver. I'm very proud of him.
I think we were lucky when my I did like uh, driving lessons with my daughter. I actually took her to where I used to work 'cause they had a big car park. Not only was it a big car park there, but once she got safe with that in terms of dimensions, and I understand that holding on with white knuckles as they get too close to things. But it was right on in the park by the local airport, so we had a bunch of roads we could go around. There was virtually no one there, so just in terms of getting used to how the car functioned, that was a great place to start. So I yeah, but
Parking.
yeah, the first
Yeah, the two things is parking. We had to spend a lot of time so he could drive to school and park. He struggled a little, not struggled, just a new car, and now he's a wizard at it. I'm a little. He kind of now he's going a little too fast getting into some of these spots. Like when we've been going to the gym together, and he'll drive there. And then the other thing is sometimes they take a turn wide, and I'm like, if there was another car coming, you would have been on the other side of the road. And he's like, but Dad, there wasn't a car coming. I'm like, that's not the way we want to drive. It's like, oh, geez. But anyhow, it's all good. And John, you mentioned going down to the farmer's market. My wife and I might go do that. I need to resupply. There's a nice Italian market. I like to go down and get my pasta and olive oil and things like that. That might be on the docket before the Super Bowl. So we might get up early and go do that. So I don't know, John. Continuing, I don't know about you. I don't eat out much still. I'm still in lockdown mode to some degree. I try to keep within my bubble, but
yeah.
Kansas City's kind of wide open. Our numbers aren't skyrocketing. So I don't know. I'm
Yeah,
cautiously optimistic. I might get a vacation this year, John.
actually, I'm starting to see friends post on Facebook that got they've tested positive. So yeah, I think things are a little bit different here. So we're going into more cautious mode for the moment until we really see how this pans out. But yeah, it's this week is the first time it's really sort of touched on people I know, whereas
Yeah.
it's become it's less abstract than it was. So yeah, but we were already we're always talking like in the post Christmas phase we would probably tone things down, but they'd started to talk about where cases are happening in terms of, I think there was some people in the local Walmart and things like that. So yeah,
Mm.
we're just watching it.
Yeah. I wonder and now we're just getting off topic a little bit. I wonder just in general, um, if the severity on the coasts ever made its way. We've kind of battened down the hatches here. I mean,
Hmm.
and then the social distancing is a little easier out here too. I got to admit
Sure.
that's being adhered to a lot at a much higher rate than I had anticipated, and I think that's helping a little bit. So, meaning when I go into a restaurant, almost every one of them has. We got a lot of plexiglass up. which is great. And then there is a lot of like this, we're losing 50% capacity or higher, and people are adhering to it. And the good news is I don't see a lot of businesses closing up as it once had. So maybe that's part of it in general. But John, I do feel you. I know one of the or two of the individuals you're talking about who came down with COVID this week. That was, that did strike home. Anyhow, John, it's been a very enjoyable podcast number 34, and I'll give you the last word.
I don't have much more to say. It's like I enjoyed it. I did enjoy it. It's like, I didn't think I'd be. I wasn't sure how it was going to go with it being Saturday morning, and I'm not great in first thing in the morning. But yeah, I think it was a good. In the end, I think the manufacturers is a good topic, and it was fun talking through that.
Speaking of that, Joe, we'll shelve our news and notes, and we're going to leave next week's topic, we'll leave our topic for the next podcast a mystery. So stay tuned. Take care, everyone.
Yes, thank you very much. Talk to you next time.